Good morning, ma'am. This is Atharva Kadam from VIT Pune MUN, and we are so much honored to have you here with us. We are very grateful that you have spared your precious time and decided to do this interview with us. All of us are proud of your immaculate feats and unparalleled contribution to the global society. This interview is for Colloquium, the official dignitary newsletter of VIT Pune MUN. Anita Bhatia Ma'am is currently serving as the Assistant Secretary General for Resource Management, Sustainability and Partnerships, and also serving as the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women. Mrs. Bhatia has had a distinguished career at World Bank Group, serving in various senior leadership and management positions, both at headquarters and in field. She brings extensive experience in the area of strategic partnerships, resource mobilization, and management. Mrs. Bhatia has also served for several years as Director of Global Partnerships for the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector of the World Bank Group. She has developed and expanded innovative partnerships with several public and private sector to support IFC strategy in the key areas, including the fragile and conflict-affected states, gender equality, financial inclusion, support to the women-owned businesses, and other priorities critical for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, she has served as the director of the Development Partner Relations for the World Bank, in which she has led efforts to ensure strategic alignment between institutional priorities and resource mobilization across the World Bank Group. In various positions, she focused on enhancing sustainability, institutional effectiveness, and impact through strategic partnerships. So, without wasting much time of ma'am, we are very much honored and proud that you had what you have done for this world. So, start without wasting so much time. Let's start, ma'am, with the questions.
Sure. It's a pleasure
So,
to be here.
thank you, ma'am. We are also very much honored to meet you. So the first question is, will you guide us through their background and how it led you to the current position as the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of the UN Women?
Um, so my background is actually a liberal arts background. I started off my undergraduate work in history, which I did in Calcutta. And then after that, I came to the US to pursue a PhD in political science. And after I got my MPhil, I decided that in fact, I wanted to be a lawyer. So I went to law school and got my Juris Doctor degree. And I had a mentor in university at Yale University. And he recommended to me the study of development and working in the area of sustainable development. And so I actually entered the World Bank Group, believe it or not, as an intern and started working as an intern. And, you know, sometimes life hands you gifts in different ways that are unexpected. And my then supervisor, my boss then, liked the work that I had done as an intern so much that he asked if I would come back and work with him again the following summer for my next internship. And I did, and then I never left the World Bank Group. And so I stayed in the World Bank Group for a long time. I went overseas. I lived in Latin America for many years. I worked as an advisor to the president of Bolivia and to the Minister for Trade and Commerce in Bolivia. And then after that, I came back to the US because the guy who was then the CEO of IFC asked me if I would move back from Peru to help him with something at IFC. So, you know, I have been one of those lucky people who's not had to really look for a job for many, many decades, because I often got asked by people to do things. And so I came back to Washington, D.C., which is the headquarters of the International Finance Corporation. And I had worked in IFC in many different jobs, including as Director of Partnerships, as Director of Advisory Operations, you know, and then I got asked by a senior person at the World Bank if I would bring to the World Bank all of the work that I had done at IFC, because IFC in those days was doing things that were a bit different from the World Bank, and they wanted to benefit from the lessons of our experience. So they asked if I would go to the bank to do that. And of course, IFC, by the way, is part of the World Bank Group, which has 5 entities. So it's one of the entities of the World Bank Group. So I ended up going back to the World Bank where I had started my career. And then, I met the woman who in those days was the head of the agency where I currently am, UN Women. And she had heard about me from some people we knew in common. And we started talking, and she said, I'd be really interested in seeing if I could persuade you to, leave the World Bank Group and come and work for the United Nations. And so I applied for a job, and then I got this job, and here I am.
Great. So it was right from the starting from the internship to this ladder of this as a director. So what an inspiration it was. Means it is not a for people from India, those who are thinking just to do a normal job and settle with the life. So it was means you are gone beyond the limits and your attitude so much. So that's the thing which we want to learn. Means it's not a normal fit in the real. Means what people think we just do the job, get some salary, decent salary, and just settle for the life. But what you had done is completely phenomenal and inspiration for all of us, those who are trying to think of this better world. So, ma'am, what are your thoughts on the leadership and communication strategies for promoting gender equality, and how you have leveraged your extensive global network to amplify UN Women's vision and secure political support?
This is a really important question, because the issue of kind of partner leadership and communication for a difficult agenda like gender equality is really important, because gender equality is not a simple problem to solve. It's not a medical problem. It doesn't have a scientific solution. It's not as if, okay, let's get a vaccine and treat this, right? It's a very complex social issue. And it has a lot to do with things that are very difficult to change, because it has to do with attitudes, it has to do with social norms in a society, it has to do with culture. So it's really important that in this role, I've had to think a lot about what's the right way to get people excited about this agenda. Because in some countries, as part of the national strategy, there will be a focus on women. So in India, women-led development is a very important part of the current government's national strategies. But there are other countries where, the political leadership is not really talking about the role of women or seeing how women can benefit society. Now, I will say that over the last decade, there has been a big shift, and there are more and more leaders who are interested in tapping the potential of the 50% of society that is women. But what is missing often is recognition of the link between certain aspects of gender inequality and growth and prosperity. So I'll give you one example. The whole issue of violence against women. There is a huge pandemic, if you will, of violence against women. But nobody really thinks about this as a problem for government to solve. People think that this is something that has to be handled in the family. It's a family issue, it's a family problem. And, this is why very often, even when police are called to a household where there is domestic violence, in many countries in the world, the police will say, you sort it out. Right? So a lot of our role is to advocate with governments and say, look, it's not just a household issue, because if you have women who are being beaten up, how can they go to work? How can they be productive? And so that's one very important thing. The other is, I really feel this is an agenda where not enough money has been spent. Governments spend money on education, on health, but they don't necessarily do it with a gender lens. So one of the things that we do is we say you should do gender responsive budgeting, which means that every ministry's job is to think about gender, it's not just the job of the Ministry of Women or the Ministry of Gender, it is the job of the Ministry of Finance to say, does your budget have a focus on women? Infrastructure, are you building roads in a way that serve women? For example, if there are rural women in one part and they have products that need to go to the market, are you building a road there? If you're transport, you're thinking about, am I building buses that are safe, that are only for women, and so they don't get harassed? So you have to have that gender lens in everything,
Yes.
you see? And that's
Yeah.
part of our communication.
Yes. Means whenever we are trying to implement the government schemes or any other schemes related to the gender equality, so we are only thinking right now on this one aspect, but not on the collective growth of this ecosystem.
Correct.
So, yeah, got it, ma'am. So, ma'am, what are the biggest challenges you have faced in your role at the UN and how you have addressed those issues?
Well, the biggest challenge, of course, is convincing governments, different kinds of governments all over the world, about how important this is. So, the way we have addressed it is through partnerships, because we believe that gender equality is too big a problem to be solved only by government. So we think about different stakeholders. We think about government, we think about business, we think about women's rights groups. All of these are stakeholders in this big battle.
Yes.
So, with government, what we are trying to do is to make sure that we are also partnering with the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, because they lend so much money to these countries that we want their programs to also have a gender lens. So we have advised the World Bank on its gender strategy, we have advised the IMF, and we are working closely with all the international financial institutions to say, you must use gender as a lens in your projects. Because the UN Women is only 12 years old, and we are the newest entity in the UN system and really the smallest. So, we cannot achieve this just by ourselves. So we work through these agencies to influence governments. Then we have partnerships with big businesses, with Google, with Price Waterhouse, with Accenture, with Microsoft. And so we ask these big companies to also focus on gender equality and say, how in their business are they making sure that they are pushing for women? Are they hiring women? Are they promoting women? Does their supply chain have women? Do they have policies that are women friendly? Because women have such a big care burden. Do they have childcare facilities? Do they give men paternity leave, not just women maternity leave? So we look at all their policies. That's very important. And we want to support women's rights organizations, because women's rights organizations are the voice from the grassroots of all of the issues.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, how recently there has been refugee crisis and some other crisis related to this due to the war. Means there are other factors. Means how is United Nations Women addressing the unique challenges faced by the refugees and migrant women, including those related to the gender-based violence and this exploitation?
The sad fact of the matter is that most refugees are women and children. And you can see this if you look at some of the pictures of who is, fleeing, whether it's in Ukraine or if it's in Myanmar or if it's in Haiti or Venezuela, wherever you look in the world, when you look at these pictures of the refugees, most of them are women and children. And so we work very closely with UNHCR, which is the office that works in the UN on refugee issues, to make sure that they have a gender lens. So we support them. We do gender assessments of crises to understand what is the impact of crises on women. And we have programs on the ground, for example, in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, that focus on the issue of employment for refugee women, creating livelihoods for them, but also making sure that the authorities are sensitive to this issue of harassment and violence against women. So we work in different ways, both through advocacy and through programming on this issue.
Yes, ma'am. Recently, there has been rapid changes in the global politics in the Middle East and in the Afghanistan. So, what are the initiatives taken by the UN Women to improve the women's rights and promote gender equality in countries like Afghanistan or the recent classic example of Iran? Those are some hard
Yeah.
countries.
I mean, Afghanistan, it breaks my heart when I see what is happening to women in Afghanistan because they are absolutely doomed. And, the Taliban has constantly said that they are going to do things and then they don't do them. So they have zero credibility when they say, they said at the very beginning when they came that they would actually allow girls to go to school. They broke their promise. They,
Yes.
they are, it's a very, very difficult situation, both there and in Iran. And I think what is really important, I believe, for this to change is that it has to become a problem that the society itself wants to change. Because from outside, you can only do so much, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, my executive director, my boss, recently went to Afghanistan with the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, met with the Taliban, and explained what the women of Taliban want. But the Taliban are not going to be affected by this, I believe.
Yes.
I think, for Afghanistan to change, what I believe is needed is for the Afghani men to come out on the street. I'm always asking myself, where are the Afghan men? Why is this just a problem for women? The men should be on the street saying, we want rights for our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our friends. Society has to rise up and say,
Right.
this is incorrect and this must be changed.
Yes, ma'am. As we all know, there are some limitations to ourselves also because we cannot go beyond a certain limit to convince some people, as in the case of Afghanistan. Because at last, we are also trying our level best to promote gender equality in these hard countries like Afghanistan. I'm adding one more question that the leadership means the women are getting coming forward and promoting leadership qualities, going into the politics, participating in the democracy process. But there is also one more country like Myanmar, where Aung San Suu Kyi has been under house arrest from so many days. So how we are doing means what UN United Nations along with UN Women is doing some taking steps to in dialogues with the military government in Myanmar.
I mean, look, we are trying to influence regimes always. So even in the case of Afghanistan, for instance, we are speaking to other Muslim countries to say, you should also be speaking to Afghanistan because it's not enough for the UN by itself to
Yes.
speak to a government. There has to be international pressure. So creating
Yes.
that international pressure is a very key strategy for us, for all countries.
And ma'am, how is United Nations Women supporting countries to implement national laws and policies which promote gender equality and human rights in some Middle Eastern countries and some other countries where this fact is not being taken into consideration to that level, which developed countries are taking?
I mean, there are a lot of countries where what we do is we understand first through a landscape assessment what is the state of the laws and the regulations that allow or don't allow certain rights for women. So, for example, in many countries, there are laws in where marital rape is legal. There are laws where women can't own land. There are laws where it's very difficult for women to open a bank account. So we usually go to that government and we say, look, you are very far from international best practice. And we can help you to change this through specific programs. We are present in 86 countries. So, in those countries, we are able to work directly with the government and say, we would like you to change these policies and we will support you to do that. In countries where UN Women is not present, because there are 193 member states of the United Nations and we can't be in every one, there is usually a UN office and we work through the UN office on
Yes.
influencing the government. And
Yes.
there also we try to work with the private sector and with business.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, how do you see the global conversion and efforts towards the gender equality in the coming next 5 to 10 years? And what role do you see this women UN organization, that is UN Women, will play in this?
I think the role of advocacy is very important. I think there were a set of gender equality issues before the pandemic, and then post pandemic, things have gotten much worse in
Yes.
many places. So, for example, if you look at many countries, girls have not gone back to school fully. So, what happened during the pandemic is because girls were at home, the levels of child marriage went up significantly.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, that's a big problem. And, we have to make sure it doesn't continue. Girls' education. There were some countries, Philippines, Peru, where girls were not in school for 2 years. And so now, because many people's fortunes also became smaller, they lost a lot of income during the pandemic. Because
Yes.
of social norms, when they have to decide who's going back to school and if they have to pay for it, it will be the boy child who gets the preference, not the girl child. So,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
have to be extra vigilant. And then what has happened after the pandemic is that in many countries, female labor force participation has dropped. So many women are not going back to work in the same way because
Yes, ma'am.
one of the things that became very clear during the pandemic is this, what we call the care burden. And the care burden is something that is not really legislated because it is assumed that women will pick up this care burden. So, for most men, when you think about the world, it is what are they doing at work and what are they doing for leisure. But for women, the choices are not work and leisure. It is work, unpaid work, which is taking care of children, taking care of the elders. All that burden falls on women. And then
Yes.
some leisure. So the burden of care is 3 times for women what it is for men. And so unless we address this issue, a woman will never be productive in the same way as men. And this is difficult because this is a cultural issue. It's an expectation. It's the woman who's going to do the cooking. It's the woman who's going to take care of the children. So we have to change all these very fundamental things to get gender equality. And that means changing the mindset, not just of
Mindset.
the men, but also of the women.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you said right. Because there are 193 countries which are in the UN. There are 193 mindsets, 193 histories. Means there are different type of people which you have to interact and convince for the global enhancement, for the future of this world.
Yes.
Means it's not a small job which we means people those who don't know means they will feel that what they are means they don't know the significance of this task which you are carrying out at UN.
Yes.
It's a I'm sad. It's very much difficult. I completely agree because you have to give a word a better future. You have to talk with the governments by implementing gender equality schemes, by changing the mindset. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you are doing a very great job, and our team will be definitely proud of what your team has achieved for this global voice.
Thank you
And
so
the
much.
next means, ma'am, the next question is what is the World Bank doing? Means, as you are also the part of the World Bank to promote sustainable development goals which were penned down by the United Nations and support rural development in the developing countries.
Well, I mean, I can speak a little bit about the bank. I'm no longer there. But, what I can see is that their strategy is to alleviate extreme poverty and to build shared prosperity, which is the mission, and to do this through focusing on all of the big problems that the world has, which includes, of course, the regressions in health and education that happened during the pandemic, but also lending to governments for investments in infrastructure, for investments in transport. Now, of course, a big issue that the World Bank will have to deal with and will have to do more on is climate change, because climate change is really threatening sustainable development. And if you don't solve for the shocks
Yes.
that come from climate change, then you really can't do everything else. So it has become, unfortunately, a sine qua non for other interventions in development. And that is something that I think the World Bank will be doing more of in the coming years. It has not done that much on climate change thus far. And I understand, though I can't confirm this, that they are working on a new strategy to address climate change in addition to the other SDG goals.
Yes, ma'am. There are some SDG goals which also promote gender equality, education. Means we
Yes,
are sure that along with UN Women, World Bank, the complete system of the United Nations are working for the global development. And yes, ma'am, can you share your as you said you worked in Latin America, in the in the North American continent. So you have traveled in different parts of the world, and
yes.
how the cultural and regional differences have impacted your approach to gender equality and sustainable finance initiatives.
I mean, the thing is, gender equality is such a sensitive issue that what works in one country is not going to work necessarily in another.
Yes.
The level of political commitment also will be different. So you have to understand how to calibrate your message based on where you are. So, I cannot, for example, in certain countries in Africa, there is no interest, and in fact, there is huge opposition to the whole issue of LGBTI rights, right? There is no tolerance in the culture or in the current political leadership in pushing rights for lesbians, gays, etc. Now, in many other countries, there is much more openness to these issues. So, you have to judge where is that country. You have to understand the national priorities, but you have to remain firmly based in universal human rights. So the thing that you cannot negotiate and that the thing that you cannot get around in any way is the issue of human rights. And so our starting point is we are a rights-based organization, and so you cannot waver on the issue of human rights, but you also have to be sensitive to national priorities.
Yes.
Now, many countries are really interested in economic empowerment, because they understand the link between economic empowerment and the growth of the country. They can, most governments will see immediately the link between that and prosperity for the society in government. But where we have more difficulty is the more cultural issues, whether it is LGBTI, whether it is talking about violence. To convince a government that violence is a public policy matter is not easy, because many of the ministers in the cabinet will be, well, it has nothing to do with government. This is a social problem. It's a personal problem. So, the other thing we advocate for is to have more women in decision-making roles. So we need to see more women, whether it's at the panchayat local government level, whether it is at the national government level. Why is it the case in this day and age, in the year 2023, that there are only 14 governments out of the 193 who have gender equal cabinets? Everybody else has more men than women in the cabinet. So we need also more women, because they understand these issues and they will push for policies that are helpful.
Yes, because whenever you are approaching a problem statement, means first of all you recognize a nation where there has been a depriving in the rights of the women. So challenge means you have to also look at the cultural aspect of the people or the nation, because
Yes.
it's not an easy job, because the problem statement or the solution which can work in a country like USA may not work in a country of Arab country.
No,
So
it won't. It won't.
yes,
So you have to
yes,
adapt.
yes, you have to also means it's a complete means it's a mind drilling process of convincing the governments and the other factors. Ma'am, finally, what advice would you like to give to the young professionals seeking to make an impact in the field of gender equality and the international development?
First of all, I think that it's very important that more people are interested in this topic. and that it is something that is, you know, front and center of their goals. Because
Yes.
actually working on the sustainable development goals is important not just for an individual but for our planet. And if
Yes.
everybody does not become a climate champion, you know, we are going to, there is no second planet, right?
Yes.
There's no second chance. So I want all young people to think about this very important fact: there is no planet B. There is no planet B. We are on planet A and it's all we've got. So we better
Yes.
take care of it. And so that has to be the starting point, you know. Everything else follows from that. If we don't take
Yes.
care of our planet, there's no point worrying about anything else because we won't have a place to live. And so I think this is very important. I think the other thing is for specific interests in gender equality, sustainable, and the other SDGs, you know, everything starts at home. So it's very important not to be a bystander. So if you see unequal treatment between a girl and a boy in the family, you must speak up and say, why are you having one set of standards for girls and one set of standards for boys? And
Yes.
try to change it in the family because that's where everything starts. And then
Yes.
the second thing is, it is so important for women to be financially independent because with a economic agency comes other kinds of agency, you know.
Yes.
And I think this is something that, you know, is really important to do for women, because without that, nothing is going to change.
Yes, ma'am. As as we know, anything means what we have to see the change in the world. First, we have to change it in our lives first.
Yes.
So,
Be
right?
the change you want to see.
Yes, ma'am. Means we have to start from our level so that we can see the picture of the future.
Yes.
So that's a definitely an what we can say, ma'am, and heart touching message for the aspirants, those who want to see the change in this world. So see the change in your life so that you can project it in the future with
That's right.
greater help.
Yes.
So, ma'am, that's all from our side. This
Great.
has been indeed an eye-opening session for all of us, and your knowledge about this topic has been extremely helpful in creating awareness among all the persons or the students who will read this magazine. I
Great.
thank you, ma'am, for agreeing you to do this interview with us today, and
No
would
problem.
like to express my gratitude on the behalf of the VIT Pune MUN team. So, ma'am, we will see the change for the better world. And,
Yes.
ma'am,
And I will be
I
in Pune
was
actually in I think in April, early April, I'm going to Pune.
okay, ma'am.
So just so you know. And then the other thing I just want to say is please ask everybody to follow me on Twitter and
Yes,
on
ma'am.
LinkedIn. Yes?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Please,
ma'am.
I want to see 1,000 people from your university on my Twitter.
Yes, ma'am. We will definitely do that.
Okay, great.
And, ma'am, also, I would like to thank the UN Women team for doing such a noble work for the promoting gender equality. And we wish all the very best for your future activity and your team for doing such a great work for promoting the better world and for promoting gender equality. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
ma'am.
much. Okay, bye bye now.
Bye bye, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.